right, good afternoon, everyone. Hope you all had a great weekend. So just a couple announcements before we get started. I did go ahead and post the homework 5. So for this homework, you'll actually be using the MySQL Workbench and MySQL Server that I had you install for week 4. Just a couple quick things you'll do. Make sure you go over the Word document and whatever it asks, make sure that you do it. It shouldn't be too tough. If you run into any major issues, you can certainly work together on it. I certainly don't mind if you do that. You can also reach out to me if you're having any major issues. But certainly, you can work together however you guys want to do it. Just make sure you submit it on time. Otherwise, it's, of course, a 25% penalty, and you don't want that. So apart from that, I did go ahead and add in the exam 1 corrections. So if you submitted those on time, I went ahead and put the credit in for those. Just a reminder to everyone, your grades will be calculated based on the formulas inside of the syllabus. So I'm not really remembering them off the top of my head. I think it's like, let me see. I don't want to say anything wrong. So the homework is worth 15% of your grade. The project, which we haven't really talked about yet, is worth 30% of your grade. The discussion assignment, which some of you have done, some of you have not, is worth 10% of your grade. And lastly, the exams are worth 45% of your grade. So the whole idea here is that, with each of these assignments, all you have to do is multiply them out times what you earned, and of course that's your score. Unfortunately, Canvas has a feature that I cannot disable where it kind of calculates your score. The only problem is it's not very configurable, and it doesn't do stuff like allow me to drop a lowest grade, applying categories to it. It just doesn't work well. So if you want to know where you're at, that's probably your best bet is just to calculate it up. You can also, if you're having trouble, certainly office hour, I'm happy to look at anything you want with regarding that. Anything in course, of course. So yeah, any questions before we begin chapter 4 today? Well, as always, I'm open to any questions as we go, so certainly feel free to interrupt me or raise your hand if you're face-to-face, and I'll certainly address anything. So last class, we talked about the one-to-one relationship, and we did a lot of different SQL scripts in there, a lot of different SQL statements, rather, and we went through a lot of different stuff, but that was only with a single entity. So today, we're going to add in another entity. So we have a one-to-many relationship where there's a one-to-one with one side of the entity, but then another entity has a one-to-many. So that's all we're talking about today. We're just adding a little bit more on. So we're going to review some of the basic concepts here. So of course, this is what the one-to-many would look like. Nation has one-to-many stocks associated with it, and a stock belongs to, in this case, one and only one nation. So that's how we represent this. Of course, I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of this particular style. I like to have the minimum and maximum cardinality, displayed in every case, but this is how the textbook uses it. So then, of course, we can also have these hierarchical relationships here. Basically, all this is saying is that there are multiple one-to-many relationships. So firm has one-to-many divisions. Divisions have one-to-many departments. And a department has one-to-many sections. So that's all this is saying is that, as we go throughout the hierarchical relationship here, we're having more than one division, or we can have more than one division. We can have more than one department within that division. So, if we think about this in terms of a typical business, maybe division would be something like finance. Maybe within the finance department, they'd have several things, several other departments. Certainly, we could think of that. There's really no limit to what we could have here. That's just kind of the basic here. So this is the data we're going to be talking about for the lecture day. So let's take a quick look at this. So we have a stock table, and we have stock code, stock firm, stock price, stock quantity, stock dividend, stock price to earnings ratio. And then that's from last class. But in this class, we're going to be adding 2 additional columns here. We have the nation name and the exchange rate. So basically what this is we are now adding on the nation that the stock is in, as well as the exchange rate for said nation. So can anyone tell me a potential problem with having it like this? Any problems at all? So one of the big problems here is that we have a lot of redundant information. We have United Kingdom. We have exchange rate 1. We could simplify that. We don't have to have that redundant information. Also, what happens if we remove Bombay duck? We lose the India and we lose the India exchange rate. So we don't want to lose information. That'd be a delete anomaly where we delete one part of something and then we lose other information we may need. So we want to avoid doing stuff where we have a non-normalized database as this is. So this table right here is not in normal form. So what we would do is we would simply take two tables. We would have a stock table, we'd have a country table or something like that, and we just go ahead and split it up. So quite simple. Just use a country code as a primary or a foreign key, and then of course a primary key inside the nation table. That's all we have to do. So again, we want to avoid these sorts of anomalies like we just talked about. So just like we talked about last class, all we're doing is we're breaking down the model, we're calling each entity a table, and then of course we're adding in our relationships as needed. So this is what this would look like. So like I just said, we're going to add in a nation code, which is going to be the foreign key inside of stock. It's going to reference the nation table. So the nation table's primary key is going to be that same nation code. And then we're adding on the information for each nation. So this has a lot fewer amounts of individual records than it would be if we had the two attributes off to the side there. We can save storage space. Now, in this particular example, we're not saving a tremendous amount, but it's certainly a sizable percentage. And you can imagine if we had millions of records, this would be quite a bit of savings, and it could also make processing more efficient, provide us with lots of advantages. So, of course, we're just going to add in a foreign key. I think we pretty much understand how this works. So in this case, the foreign key is going to be this nation code, because it's going to be referencing the nation code inside of the nation table. So that's all we have to do. Of course, we also want to make sure that the foreign key has referential integrity applied to it. What that means is that we're making sure that if we have a foreign key, it is in fact present inside of the table. So for example, looking back at this, we couldn't have anything other than UK, USA, AUS, and IND. Those are the only values for nation code we're going to allow, because otherwise we have a foreign key that is not referenced inside of what it's supposed to be referencing. And that'd be a pretty substantial problem. So that's all this is saying. We're just going to apply some referential integrity here. Let's go ahead and look at how we would do this in SQL. So like last class, we're going to use the create statement. And we're going to create a table, call it nation. So within that, we're going to do an open parentheses, put our various attributes here. We have nation code. We're going to define that as a character 3. That means that we're going to use A through Z, and we're going to have up to 3 characters there. For nation name, we're going to use a varchar. That allows us to have a more variable length than a character. It's less fixed. So some countries may have a very short name. Other countries may have a longer name. So essentially what we're doing is we're just going to use up to 20 characters. And then lastly, for exchange rate, we're just saying it's going to be 9 long with a decimal point around the 5th. So that's pretty straightforward. We're defining the primary key here as nation code for the nation table. And then we're going to do something similar for stock. Of course, we have the create table stock, open parentheses, placing all of our attributes in here. We're defining the primary key as a stock code. No big surprises there. Then we're adding in a foreign key constraint down here. And what this is saying is that the foreign key is present within the nation table, and then also that it's referencing this nation code right here. This is a very important statement. So certainly make sure that you understand what this is saying. All this is saying that we have to have the foreign key within inside of the nation table. Otherwise, we have a pretty big problem. This is just what this looks like inside of MySQL Workbench. If you were to use the visual approach, which I don't recommend. But basically, this is a non-identifying relationship here. And what that means is that both entities can stand on their own. They don't require the presence of the other for their information to be logical. So for example, if we have nation information, you don't have to have stocks associated with that. It's not dependent upon that. So that means it's a non-identifying relationship. So that's all we're saying there. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at this. develop a data model to keep track of a distance runner's times over various lengths. So basically, we just have maybe a table for runner, and then maybe a table for the nation they're from. That's certainly something we would do, and like I said, it's pretty straightforward. Then we could create the database and add 3 rows. So all we'd have to do is just insert the data that we want to insert for the various runners and nations, and that's basically it. So we're not going to go too far into depth on that. I do want to make note, next class we will be using MySQL Workbench in class. So basically, we'll just go through some various things we can do. Certainly, I think it'll be a pretty interesting lecture. Any questions that you guys have, I'm happy to address them today or Wednesday or anytime really. So certainly keep that in mind. But now we're going to add in some of the new content. So last class, we really focused on different types of queries and lots of good things. But today, it's going to get just a little bit more complicated. But this complication allows us to be substantially more powerful in what we can do. So today, we're going to add in the join statement. So all we're doing here is we're going to output basically the combined table. So you think back to one of the first slides. This looks very similar. It's the same information, but we can store it more efficiently. So what we do here, we do a select statement like normal, only once we've done the select what we want to from where we want to, we add in join. And that join is going to say we want to not only get information from the first table, but we also want to get it from this other table. And then we define that join by saying what we're joining based upon. So in this case, we're doing on stock.nat code. And just as a quick note, the stock.nat code, that first part, the table name dot variable name, that's the format here. So equals the nation. That's the nation table dot nat code. That's the variable we're comparing to. So then we close it off with our good friend the semicolon, and that's what the join statement is going to look like. So when we do this, it allows us to do queries as though we're dealing with a single table, even though we're not. So it's very beneficial. Any questions about this so far? I'm certainly happy to address any questions. This is definitely one of the most important concepts of this chapter. So as we go, we're going to get a little bit more complicated and be able to do a little more interesting things maybe. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to actually report the value. So you think back to the last class where we did calculated values, and all we had to do was do the calculation inside the select statement and then say what we're going to display it as. So we had to do that by saying calculation as whatever we want to display it as. So in this case, what we're doing is we're selecting the nation name, the stock firm, stock price, stock quantity, exchange rate. We're taking the stock price, multiplying it by the stock quantity and the exchange rate. That's going to give us the stock value because, certainly if you take the amount of shares you have times the price per share, that gives you the amount, the overall value. In this case, we're dealing with different countries, so we're just going to multiply it by the exchange rate. That's all that is. Now, of course, if you look at this, you'll see nation name is not inside the stock table. So how do we address that? We want to get a variable that's not inside the same table. We just talked about it. So how we would address that is we would do a join statement. So basically, we're just saying we're selecting this information from the stock table, but we're going to join that to the nation table. And then as we discussed, we're joining that on the stock.nation code equals nation.net code. We're ordering this by the national firm, or the company name rather, as well as the stock firm. So first we're doing the national name, whatever the name of the country is. Then we're ordering by the stock firm. So as you can see here, of course, we have the Australian stocks first, then India, United Kingdom, and lastly, United States. That because we're using the descending order by default there. So certainly as we go, the order will decrease. If we want to change that, we just put in an ascending condition. But that's really all we're doing here. So we're just selecting that information, just kind of applying some of the concepts we talked about previously to this, and that's really all there is to it. So now it may be that we want to, instead of just looking at each of these different countries where we have all the stocks for Australia, maybe we want to look at what is the total value of our portfolio for Australia? What is the total value of our portfolio for United Kingdom? And so on and so forth. So there's a really easy way to do that in SQL. You just use the group by. So what you would do is you do the select statement like normal. So in this case, we want to get the nation name because that's what we're going to group by. And then we also want to get the sum of all of our stocks for that specific nation. So in this case, we're doing the same thing we did before. We're taking the stock price, we're taking the amount of shares we have of that stock, and we're multiplying both of those by the exchange rate for the country. We're saving that in this case as stock value, and then we're selecting this from the stock table with a join of the nation table on, of course, stock.nation code equals nation.nation code. And all we're doing is we're adding in group by nation name. So this group by nation name is going to go ahead and do this, and it's going to only output the sum, because that's what we selected up here, of the different nations. So I think this is getting pretty cool. Hopefully you guys think it's getting pretty cool as well. So we don't just have to be limited, though, to having whatever we have. So imagine we had 1,000 unique countries, or let's say 190, because that's a lot more logical. So if we had 190 countries, maybe we don't care about every single country. We may have a country that we only have 2 stocks in. And while we do have that inside of our country table, we may not care about that. So all we have to do to determine whether we care about that, after the group by condition, we can go ahead and say we only want it in this condition is met. So in this case, we're going to say if it has 2 or more different stocks associated with it. So what we're doing is we're saying having count star greater than or equal to 2. Now, we could do a lot of different things here. So in this case, we're just looking at the number of stocks. So in this case, India, we only have 1 stock for India, the Bombay Duck stock. So in this case, because we only have the Bombay Duck stock, we're not going to be able to really, we're not counting it because we're saying we have 2 or more stocks for our country. So that's what we're doing, and that allows us to do a lot of different things. So let's go ahead and look at this exercise here. Who can tell me how to report the total dividend payment for each country that has 3 or more stocks in the portfolio? So it's kind of similar to what we just did. So anyone want to take a stab at that? Let's look at it together. So what we're doing is we're taking the total dividend payment for each country. So right off the bat, we're going to be selecting the country, and we're going to be selecting the total dividend payment. Now, we can think about this. We don't have the total dividend payment. We have to calculate that. So we think about that. All we're going to do is we're just going to take the stock dividend, that's the dividend per share, multiply that by stock quantity. Let's save that as a total dividend, something like that. So we just do select nation name, or nat name, comma, stock dividend times stock quantity as total dividend. Now, where do we want to get that from? Well, we want to get that from the stock table. So we do from stock. Now, of course, we also want to get the nation name. We only have the nation code inside of the stock table, so we're going to do a join. So we're going to join nation on stock.nat code equals nation.nat code. And then, of course, we're going to group by because we want to get the total for each country. So we're just going to group by nat name. And then in this case, it says 3 or more. So we're just going to do having count star greater than equal to 3. So is that clear to everyone? So again, that's how we're going to do this. There's going to be a specific order. I believe this is a specific order. This is the most important slide in the entire chapter. So I would certainly recommend you print this off, however you want to have it. But certainly this is what makes the most sense. This is why this kind of describes the order of how we're going to do things, basically. So the select is always going to come first inside of a SQL query. If we're going to do a select statement, we're going to do it first. So we're going to select whatever we want to, whatever sort of columns in this case, so whatever variables we want. And then we're going to tell it where are we selecting it from. So that's going to come on the same line. So in this case, we can put whatever tables we want. If we're getting it from one table, two tables, whatever the case may be. Then, of course, we would go down and we say, what are the conditions? When are we going to select this information? So that's where we do the where. And then, of course, we're going to group all this by. If we're going to do a group by statement, we don't have to do a group by statement, certainly no requirement. But if we do, it comes after the where. And then we know if we're doing a group by statement, we can also apply a condition to that. The condition, of course, being having. So we can do one condition, we can do two conditions, we can do 5 million conditions. There's no limit to the amount of conditions we do. And then lastly, the order by is going to come last. So that's basically what we're doing. So as you're writing these queries, this is the order you would go in. Now, of course, there's additional information we could do here. So, you could do where, you do where something is greater than, you could do a subquery. So maybe you want to get the average. You do the select average from whatever your table is. Certainly something you could do there. There's an infinite amount of possibilities with this. This is the general format you'll use. So when you're talking about what is the order of each of these various things, this is what you need to know. Do you need to memorize it? Well, I'd say probably not, but it's certainly good to be able to reference it very quickly. On the exam, I can guarantee you, you'll be writing SQL queries. You'll be doing various statements within SQL. It's going to be very important that you can be able to find this information at a pretty fast rate because you're timed. In the professional environment, if you had infinite time for everything, well, your company may not be very productive. So it's important to be able to do things quickly. I'm not saying you have to memorize this, but to be able to reference it very quickly. So however you want to do that, if you want to print this off, put it beside your computer. If you want to print this off, put it in your notebook. I don't really care how you decide to do it. Just make sure that you're able to find this information very quickly. So any questions? Looks like we got a question in chat. Can we not just grab all the stock value and add them together instead of doing the multiplication process every time? I'm not sure what you mean by multiplication process. If you're talking about multiplying the stock value, we could apply that to a view. We'll talk about that towards the end of class. And the view would allow us to prevent having to calculate the variable every time, but we'd still have to do it one time minimum. So we'll come back to that. So then, of course, we're going to talk about regular expression. So if you remember last class, regular expression is basically just searching for characters. So we can do a lot of different things. And we're going to talk about some additional things we can do. So in this case, we're going to say these brackets mean anything that contains, this particular set of characters. So we're going A, B, C, D, E, F. That's what this A-F means. Anything that's within here. If it's not within here, it's going to return it in this case. So basically what we're doing here is we can list the nations with non-alphabetical characters within their names. So in this case, what we're saying is if the nation name has anything other than A through Z, so maybe it has an apostrophe, maybe it has a hyphen, it could also have a number. I don't know of any nations with numbers in their names, but there could be. So we're going to find that out if we run this query, because it's going to return all of the nations that do not have only A through Z within inside of their name. So that's basically what we're doing here. Again, we're just using the brackets to denote any of these characters. That's all we're adding. So we could also search for something with repeated characters. So in this case, instead of using brackets, we're going to see with the, anyone know what this type of bracket is called? Brace, that's what I'm looking for. Appreciate it, Jarek. Yeah. So we're going to look for this brace right here. And that's going to say, are we repeating the character? So in this case, we're going to do a 2. So we're saying, does it have double E's anywhere inside of it? So for example, if we were looking at, instead of looking at stock firm, imagine we were looking at a database of cheese. Would we see a lot of double E's inside of cheese? I think so. Certainly, if you have different types of cheese, cheddar cheese, that has double E. If you have American cheese, almost every cheese says the word cheese. So certainly keep that in mind. All we're doing is we're taking this character, we're seeing if it has this specific character, and then we're saying, does it have it twice in a row? So that's all this is saying. Regular expressions, their syntax can be a little bit challenging. I'm probably not going to have a lot of test questions that cover them because, frankly, this is the type of thing, if you need to use it, you'll look it up. I don't really expect you to memorize 100%. Memorize the important ones, though. So certainly the important ones are the ones we did in Chapter 3. So let's continue going through these a little bit, though. Now we can also, like last class, we can add in the OR condition. So we're saying if we're repeating S twice or we're repeating N twice, we're going to return that. So that's all we're doing here. Certainly pretty straightforward. And then in this case, we're saying if it contains I, nia, or O, nia. So in this case, if we have multiple characters here, it's going to do it for both of them. So in this case, that's all we're doing. We're just going to return those firms. So anything that contains the I, nia, or the O, nia. So certainly keep that in mind. And again, if you want to learn more about this, you can visit here. There are dozens of different regular expression syntaxes. Like I said, I certainly wouldn't test you over a whole lot of things with regular expression. It can be very powerful, but it's also one of those things that is going to be kind of more higher level, certainly. So it's going to be very specific to what you're wanting to do. So certainly keep that in mind. But I do think it's important to know the basics. So here's a good basic question right here. We're going to see report the names of nations starting with United. So we don't have to do any sort of joins on this. This is just kind of a review from Chapter 3. Who wants to take a stab at this? So let's go through this together. So we're going to report the name of nations. So right off the bat, we're going to do a select, and then we're going to do nation because we're wanting to name a nation. So whatever our nation name is, I believe it's nat name. So we're going to do select nat name. And where are we getting this from? So it's going to be select nat name from nation, because nation is the table that contains the nat name. And then all we have to do is just do a where condition. So we're going to do where, and then it's going to be nat name. Now, what's the regular expression we're going to use here? Something that starts with. So first, we're going to put an open quote. We're going to do the upwards character symbol. It is 6 on your keyboard. So, and then we're going to put in United. So we're saying it starts with United, close off the quote, and then, of course, put a semicolon at the end to make sure that everyone understands, specifically the SQL understands, we're ending the command. So that's all we have to do there. Does that make sense to everybody? So again, that's probably about the level I would ask on an exam if I even ask about regular expression at all. Like I said, there's really a lot of different types of regular expressions I would probably do starting with or ending with. Not any of the kind of more advanced things. Probably wouldn't ask about regular expression at all, though, to be honest. So certainly keep that in mind. Now we're going to get more into subqueries. So I talked about, if we have the where condition, this is where the subqueries are going to go. So all we're doing here is we're doing a query, and then we're doing a query inside of that query. So it's pretty straightforward. In this case, we're going to report all the names of the Australian stocks. So first, we're selecting the stock firm. That's going to be the stock name. So we're selecting that from our stock table. But we only want to get the Australian stocks. So there's two ways we could go about this. In this case, we're going to take the more complicated way. But if we want to be a little bit lazy, we could just do where the, I believe it'd be nat code equals AUS. And of course, we'd put AUS inside of quotes. And that'd be the lazy way to do it. But say we didn't know what the nat code was for the Australian country. So instead of doing just equals AUS, we can actually do a subquery here. So we're going to say we're selecting all of the stock that are within inside of the stock table where the nation code in, and this is where the subquery comes in. So we're going to select the nation code from nation where the nation name equals Australia. So all we're doing is we're just doing a query inside of another query there. So you have to be very careful on how you respond to a question because you have to read what it's asking for. So in this case, it would not actually be appropriate to put where nation code equals open quote AUS close quote semicolon because it's asking for Australian in particular. Now I would of course make this a little bit more clear on a homework or exam question, but that's kind of the approach you would take. So you just do a subquery there. It's going to go inside the where condition. So keep that in mind. Now, of course, we can get a little bit more complicated with this. In this case, what we're going to do is we're going to actually find the stocks where the quantity exceeds the average. So we did something similar to this last class where we went through and we got the stock quantity. Then we did the average stock quantity. Only in this case, we're going to add in some join conditions inside of the actual subquery. So it gets a little bit more complicated. So again, we want to get the nation name, the stock firm, that's the stock name, stock quantity. Those are the three things we're going to select. We're getting that from the stock table. We're going to do a join on the nation table. And the reason we're doing that join is because we need the nation name. And of course, the join condition is going to be stock.nationcode equals nation.nationcode. Just as a quick tip here, whatever the order is, so if you're doing from stock join nation, you're always going to put the first table here that you reference. So in this case, we're referencing stock first. We're putting stock first. Make sure you do the order the same. And of course, in this case, we're getting the join. We're also adding another condition where stock quantity is greater than, and then we're doing the select average stock quantity from stock. That's pretty straightforward. But then we're adding in another where condition to that subquery, and we're saying where the stock.nationcode equals nation.nationcode. So that's going to give us the average that is larger for each country. So that's all we're doing here, is we're just taking this information and we're applying it. So we're getting the different nation codes. We're getting the name of the stock that has the largest value, or the largest, not value, but the largest amount of quantity that we hold, and what that quantity is. So any questions about this so far? Like I said, certainly feel free to jump in with any questions at all. Okay, let's see one more example here. So what we're doing is we're doing another correlated subquery. It's pretty similar. We're just doing, instead of doing only the nation name, so we're not going to apply any sort of unique. What we're just going to do is we're going to select the nation name, stock firm, and stock quantity, and we're just going to do where stock quantity is greater than the average. So this is what we're looking at here. So pretty similar to the last thing. Yeah. So basically, this is just showing us that these are what it's comparing for Australia. It's selecting the maximum for those, where it's greater than the average, rather. So that's what we're doing. So in this case, we're not just selecting where it's larger than the average. So pretty straightforward. Any questions? So now let's do another exercise here. We're going to report the country, the firm, and the stock holding for the maximum. So before we were doing the average, we're saying what is larger than the average. And now we're going to report the maximum quantity of stock held for each country. So last time we were just taking a kind of a sum of what it exceeded the average. We're only caring about the maximum quantity now. So how would we do this? Anyone want to take a guess at this? All right, let's go through this together. So we're wanting to get the country, the firm, and stock. So that tells us some important information. We're going to be selecting the nation name, we're going to be selecting the stock firm, and we're going to be selecting the stock quantity. So that's what we mean by stock holding, is how much of the stock do we hold, how many shares. And of course, we're going to be doing that from stock. We're going to be doing join nation on, then we're going to do, of course, stock.natcode equals to nation.natcode. And we're going to do stock quantity greater than equals to. We could also do stock quantity equals to, and then we're going to do a subquery. It's going to be open parentheses, select max stock quantity. So we're going to make sure we're getting the max for each country from stock, where stock.nationcode equals to nation.nationcode. Close off the parentheses, end it with a semicolon, and that's what we're going to do to select the maximum of each country. So that's all we have to do there. Pretty straightforward. Any questions? And by the way, does everyone understand why I say you can do either greater than equals to or equals to for the maximum value? So I'll just go over the reason briefly. Of course, if you have a maximum, greater than or equals to should give you the same value as equals to. So if you've taken a lot of programming classes, you've probably seen the equals operator, and that would be what you would normally use. However, in SQL, you would use the equal sign. So just kind of keep that in mind. It's a little bit different, but it's the same concept. Of course, in SQL, the apply to operator is also equal. So a little bit confusing, but not too confusing. So now we're going to address Ethan's question earlier, which is, what if we don't want to retype all this information? So we can use what's called a view. And a view is similar to a table, only it doesn't actually contain any real values. So everything within inside of this view, we can treat it as though it's a table, but it's not an actual table. So what we're doing here is we're storing a blueprint of how we would build this table, and then we can apply just standard operators to it, standard scripts, whatever we want to do, and it works the same exact way. So to do this, it's going to be kind of similar to creating a table. We're going to do create, in this case, we're creating a view instead of create table. So we're going to call this view, in this case, stock value. So what we're doing here is we're first assigning the different column names. So these can be anything we want. We could call this literally anything. I'd recommend it be logical, but what I'm saying is whatever we put here is going to be what it's going to be called whenever you reference it later. So now we're doing as select, and this is where we're getting what the values are. So make sure that you match the order. So nation is going to be the same as nation name. Firm is going to be stock firm. Price is going to be stock price. So on and so forth. The order is extremely important. Now, one thing you may notice here is we have a computed variable, and we're not saying as. What's implied that value is going to be defined as stock price times stock quantity times exchange rate. So certainly want to keep that information in mind. We don't say as if we apply something to a view definition, because we've already defined what the variable will be called. Now it's just a matter of saying, in order, what is the calculation of the variable? So for most of these, it's just a variable that we already have, or I should say it is a column that we already have. Of course, like I said, we don't have to define that with as if it's a calculated column. Now we're just going to say where we get the information. So we say from stock. Now we're not only in the stock table, so we also do a join nation on stock.nationcode equals nation.nationcode. Close it off with a good friend, the semicolon, and we run this, and we have a new view. We can do lots of different things with this view. Like I say, we can run any query we want to on it, and it'll basically be the same as though we're using a actual table, but it's not an actual table. This just allows us to save time and to go ahead and have the joins applied, and we don't have to retype this stuff over and over. You know, this database should be all about saving time, making your organization more efficient. This is one way to do that. Having said that, this does use some pretty substantial processing power, so you'd certainly want to keep that in mind and apply things like indices and other ways to kind of mitigate some of that. We'll talk about indices in coming chapters. So basically, all we're doing here is we're just showing how we could run basic queries on it. So we're selecting nation, firm, and value from the stock value. In this case, it's a view, so it's not the stock value table. We're just doing where value is greater than 100,000. So pretty straightforward. We don't have to do anything manual every time we do this from now on if we assign this to a view. So again, we kind of went over why we would do this. Let's go ahead and create a view together. So create a view for the dividend payment. So right off the bat, we start off the create statement by saying create view. So that's what we're going to be doing. We're not creating a table, we're creating a view. We're going to call this stock div. Call it anything you want, of course, as long as it's logical. And then, of course, we do an open parentheses, whatever variables we want to have. So in this case, we'll just say something like nation, comma firm, comma price, comma quantity, comma division, or dividend, not division. Then we do comma maybe total dividend. We call the variable that. And then we would do as select, and then of course we do another open parentheses there. We do nation name, comma stock firm, comma stock price, comma stock quantity, comma stock dividend, comma stock dividend times stock quantity. Then of course we tell it where we're getting that information from. So it's going to be from the stock join nation on stock.nationcode equals nation.nationcode. That's all we have to do to just kind of create that view. Now the main thing to keep in mind is that instead of doing create table, we're just calling it create view. And like I said, it's really beneficial because we can really do a lot of powerful things with this, and we don't have to repeat that information. So it certainly makes a lot of sense. Let me know if you have any questions. Just kind of wrap things up. We talked about the one-to-many relationship today. We covered the most important concept within the chapter, which is, of course, the join condition. You know, how we do a join. All we have to do is just make sure we set the foreign key equal to whatever the primary key is in the other table. Pretty straightforward. Of course, we reference it by table name dot column name. That's pretty much what we do there. We did some different types of subqueries. Subqueries within subqueries gets a little bit complicated. We also, of course, use the group by to only output for the sum of whatever we assign for each of the different categories. So, of course, we also did order by as well, which is where we'd actually order the output. So that's the difference between group by and order by, of course. We use the having condition, and we also covered views. So any questions about anything today? All right, like I say, next class we'll pick up actually doing some exercises in SQL together. If you're attending face-to-face, make sure you have your laptop with MySQL Workbench and MySQL Server installed and ready to go. Apart from that, I hope you all have a great day.